Right, good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the continuing saga, which is us covering the Crusades. I'm joined by my co-host in this endeavour, Bede Britannia. How are you, sir?
Very well, thank you, at William Grenfell.
No worries. And nearly dead named me there in Pride Month. You don't dead name people in Pride Month.
Yes.
and
Oh no.
um, and I'm also joined by our a special guest today for the third. This is the Third Crusade, so it's going to be very Anglo focused. This particular one. I'm joined by IronDuke. How are you? How are you, sir?
I'm very good, thank you, William, and thanks for inviting me.
No worries. Obviously, I think we have talked about countless times Richard Lionheart. We've probably, I think, either on the history or we've talked about the Angevins. For me, it was kind of it makes sense to really have yourself, Iron Duke, on. Um, we've talked about a lot of figures around, you know, this his family. Um,
It's worth looking at this crusade. I mean, I'm no great expert on the Crusades, including this one, but I do know a little bit about this one because, as you rightly say,
mm.
it was the main English crusade.
And for
Um,
most people, and for most people in the world, if I go on the street now and ask somebody, "What do you know of the Crusades?" 9 times out of 10, or near enough 10 times out of 10, they will say, "Oh yeah, the Richard Lionheart, and this great crusading army, and the Templars led by King Richard and Saladin," or they in their mind they would sort of visualize that because in many ways, the first crusade was by lesser nobles and princes at best and dukes, and then it would be the second crusade. It would you start to have a few monarchs, but it'd still be organized by dukes and counts. The third crusade, this is in by proportion, it's big. You have emperors, you've
yeah,
got
this is called the
kings.
king. This is called sometimes called the King's Crusade because, as you say, you had the King of France, the King of England, and Barbarossa, the Emperor
Holy
of
Roman, yeah,
Holy
Holy
Roman
Roman Emperor
Empire. Yeah,
Germany, yeah, and you even had the Byzantine Emperor as well, who, well, we'll get into what went on with him, but that you still have the sort of Byzantine, um, I guess you could say, element in this. But this is the first time we also see the Third Crusade where the Eastern Romans, the Byzantines, aren't exactly filled with joy with the crusading army, and you actually do start to see this um, sort of split in attitude here. And of course, as we spoiler alert for the Fourth Crusade, we will see this culminate in a very dramatic way for the Eastern Roman Empire. But leaving that aside, we'll get on with the Third Crusade. Now, where we left off was the end of the Second Crusade. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was somewhat saved by the end of it. The county of Edessa had been conquered, but the crusading states along the coastline, including Kingdom of Jerusalem, was largely saved. Now, as a result, you had what was emerging in Egypt was the fall of the Fatimids and the rise of a Kurdish warrior, warlord, leader in this, which we know now as Saladin. And he would become the Sultanate of Egypt and Syria. He would, and also usurp the power of the Fatimid Shia. Um, Bearing in mind he was Sunni, so Shia Islam in Egypt, the Shia Islam dominance in the region, and particularly in Egypt and Syria, was greatly diminished because of this. Um,
Just to interrupt quickly, it should be noted the Fatimids, yes, they were conventionally Shia, and there was a hierarchy of Shiite imams and mujtahids. Most of the population of their empire was largely still Sunni.
Yeah.
Unlike the Safavids in Iran, you don't see a mass conversion project.
Yeah, that's the thing, because at this point, and this is a good thing you reminded me, Bede, at this point, Shia Islam, I think, was still nominally like a minority sect within Islam. You still had patch.
Well, it's always been the minority. It's just where this idea of it not being a minority comes from is that in the 10th century, you saw the rise of two great Shiite states. You had the Fatimid Caliphate and then the Buyids in Iran and Iraq. And so, this idea of a Shiite ascendancy, yes, you've got two powerful Shiite states, but a vast majority of Muslims were still Sunni because both those states failed to convert the majority of their subjects to Shiism.
Yeah, you still had, and yeah, majority in Syria and in Egypt, like it is today, and in the Transjordan area, were sort of followed Sunni Islam, and also not to mention the native Christian population as well, and so on. But within Islam, yeah, the Sunnis were the majority, and so for Saladin. So correct me if I'm wrong, Bede. I believe it was a revolution. It was all described like a revolution that was it more like a court coup, or was this more like a direct revolution from the I get, what would you call it, the warrior class in the Fatimids?
Well, just to clarify, so the Fatimid Caliphate, so obviously they emerge in what is now Tunisia in the sort of early 10th century, and by the last quarter of the 10th century, they've conquered Egypt and Cairo, then push on and conquer Syria. And about 100 years before Saladin becomes Sultan, you have the death of, I think it's Al-Mustasim, who was the last of the great Fatimid caliphs, and then the next 100 years until their demise, you have a series of very weak caliphs who are dominated by their grand viziers, kind of like these are sort of a generalissimo figures. And so, obviously, you have the loss of territory, you have the loss of Syria, you have the loss of other territories, and it's just a reduction to a core Egyptian state. So that's one issue. But what ends up happening as well is, due to the dire situation in Egypt, because Egypt has so much resources, what ends up happening in the years leading up to the rise of Saladin is both the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the Zengids under Nur al-Din are engaged in this epic sort of contest to try and see who's going to take over Egypt, because Egypt has got such a large population and resource base that it's essential to whoever side can control it for the war effort. And so you have, for about 10 years or so under the reign of King Amalric in Jerusalem, you have something like 5 different invasions of Egypt by both the Crusaders and the Zengids, and the Zengid forces are led by Saladin's uncle Shirkuh, and then Saladin and his father Ayub are both officers in this army, which is largely Mamluks, who are these slave or liberated slave Turkic, Kurdish, and Circassian warriors. And what's happening is the Zengid forces ultimately beat the Crusaders and conquer Egypt. Then what happens is Shirkuh dies, and Ayub defers to his son as the leader of the Zengid forces in conquered Egypt. And so,
can I ask you, Bede, are these Mamelukes the same Mamelukes who Napoleon ends up beating in the Revolutionary Wars?
Yes, exactly.
Cool. Thank you.
Is it are they? Because I've the Mamelukes, because you also have like a Mameluke dynasty in India, northern India as well, or similar. They're referred to as Mamelukes. Is it like the Boyars, like in the Balkans? Is it like an almost like a class of of people in that society?
Well, the boyars, from my understanding, were Russian, so they were, in the Kievan Rus and in Novgorod, and they were essentially a Russian warrior aristocracy, no different from your Western European knight, from my understanding. Whereas the Mamluks, the difference is that the Mamluks were ethnically predominantly Turkic, but as I've said, they were also Kurds and some Circassians as well, and these were people who were originally non-Islamic, who were sold in slavery, converted to Islam, and then had to, serve a term of forced service as a soldier. And what tended to happen is after a period of time, they would be quote unquote freed, but many of them would stay in military service because that's all they'd ever known. And typically, what you'd have happen is the higher ranking Mamelukes would be freed ones because they could rise and become officers.
Mm.
So a lot of these Mamelukes actually started off as Christian children who were basically enslaved.
Depends. So the Turks from Central Asia were never Christian. They practiced some form of like shamanic paganism.
Tengrilism. There was you had a lot of Tengrilists coming through. I guess you could say through Khorasan in the east and parts of Iran. But yeah, it would be some forms of Tengrilism or that sort of form of religion.
So the stuff I know about the Mamelukes is much later. It's like 18th and early 19th century, and at that stage, a lot of the history books will describe these. But I mean, obviously, it's changed by them because there are not many pagans around by that time. But a lot of these books will describe many of the Mamelukes as starting off as Christians, who, as Bede was saying, they were enslaved when they were usually children, and then had to perform military service. So by the time that Napoleon is fighting these guys at the Battle of the Pyramids, a lot of them did start off as Christians, although, as Bede said, they were more or less forcibly converted when they were enslaved.
Probably I would now this is just I did read, particularly when the Mamelukes went further south, because then this might be what's referencing Duke, Nubia, so what's now Sudan, northern Sudan, which is of course Islamic, was a Christian kingdom. It could be that when they went, they would have taken young Nubian men and boys.
Ethiopia was a type of Christian. I'm not sure much of the Sudan was, but the Ethiopia, which is quite close, certainly was.
Yeah, Nubia, which is what is now northern Sudan, it was Christian. It was Christian, I think, up until I want to say like the 14th century, largely, and then it was just because of the just Islamic, sort of southward expeditions and territorial seizures.
All of the Islamic expansion, which as I'm sure you spoke about when you talked about the First Crusade. I mean, the Crusades themselves were a response to hundreds of years of Islamic expansion. They weren't the Christians suddenly deciding, we're going to go and beat up on the Muslims. It was much more of a counterstroke, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, and also this is a time like before Napoleon, as you know, Andrew, you had the Barbary slave trade as well, which also did. I mean, well, yes, it wasn't necessarily Egypt. They would have had slaves from the Barbary to Egypt as well.
Yeah, and many people argue that the Barbary pirates, the Barbary states, enslaved more white people than Africans who were sent to North America. I mean, I don't know who's in the right of that, but there's certainly a historical argument about that.
Yeah, it's possible.
Well, just to address the point about converting Christians, well, another term for a kind of Islamic slave soldier other than Mamluk is a Gilman or a Ghulam. That is the preferred term in Iran, Persia, because I mean, I've talked about this in my modern Iran series, but when you have the Safavids, they would capture and enslave Caucasian Christians such as Georgians and Armenians and even Circassians. And they would, so that's an example. And obviously the Ottomans in their the Devashirme system for their Janissaries. So it's possible that maybe some of the Circassian Mamluks may have been formerly Christian, but the Turks and Kurds certainly wouldn't have been formerly.
Circassians are quite interesting. Very handsome women the Circassians had. Very, very, very cute girls.
It's like the Russians. I was going to say It's like the Russians. You have very, very cute girls, and then like you absolutely hideous men. This is just very bizarre.
Well, another thing about the Circassians is later when you get the Mamluk Sultanate. There's a period in the second half of that, from about the 14th century until their conquest by the Ottomans, where the actual office of Sultan was actually dominated specifically by Circassian Mamluks. So.
Yeah, I mean, even in the Crimean War, a lot of the senior Turkish officers were, because obviously the Turks were allies of the Brits and the French in 1854 to 56. And a lot of their senior officers were actually not Turks at all. But yeah.
Yeah. So just quickly, I'll say just follow on from the Second Crusade. So Almeric the First. So what you had was the defeat of the Zengids at the Battle of the Horns and Hammer in 1175, and this was Saladin basically the supremacy, securing supremacy completely over Syria, apart from parts of northern Syria which still remained in Turkic hands. Amaric the First, King of Jerusalem, at this point had died, and this left the throne to his 13-year-old son Baldwin IV, which of course is I guess he's sort of immortalized for many in that god awful Kingdom of Heaven film. But yes, it's the Leper King, and while he was a very, very courageous and a very decent tactician, in the sense of he did have several victories which was all referenced in the film. But I think one thing that is sort of overlooked is he was very, very good at administrating and running the kingdom. He was quite a good king all round. I don't think the film really does him too much justice in that regard, but he was a very, very good warrior. And I'm just trying to think. In the film, there's like this depiction of these various factions, wanting peace and war and all that sort of stuff. And that was true, but you didn't have this. I was going to say you didn't have like what was it, Guy of Lisson, who was the villain in the film. He doesn't necessarily directly speak out against the king.
And the depiction in that movie is not accurate at all. He wasn't this cartoon villain that they made him out to be in that film.
No, I will say that Reynald de Chatillon, who was featured, played by Brendan Gleeson, from what I've read, that depiction of him in the film is more or less accurate. He was a bit of a raider and a bit of a rampager, which is why Saladin executed him after Hattin.
Yeah, very true. But the other chap wasn't quite the cartoon villain they made him out to be in the movie. It was, as always in history, it was a bit more complicated than that. But I think you're right, Bede, about the other dude. Yeah.
Yeah. Because of course he was known for raiding Arab caravans into I guess it was was it within Saladin's realm, or was it within? Because I can't remember what was controversial. Did he actually like break treaties and went into the into raids into Saladin's, like what was it, like Syria?
Well, the thing is, it wasn't just raiding caravans, AI. If anything, Kingdom of Heaven plays this down. Well, he actually goes full on pirate mode. He actually gets like a fleet and goes full Viking on like the Red Sea, on like the Hejaz and in Egypt. So yeah, literally imagine Viking crusaders going around and pillaging the Red Sea. So yeah, he was an absolute menace.
Yeah, that's a bit weird. Like, okay, that because I don't know. I'm surprised nobody in the king's court was like, what's he doing? Why is he amassing? Why is he amassing all these ships? What's this about? You're not going to raid, are you? You're not going to break our treaty, are you?
You've also got to look at the relative powers of various people. Then, I mean, like the King of Jerusalem, he only had a limited number of troops, as compared to like the other great lords in the Holy Land. And so there was only so much he could do, even if he didn't approve of it.
Yeah, he had to rely on, obviously, limited number of levies, and also various orders like the Knights Templar, Knights Hospitaller, and I think the Knights of Saint Lazarus were around at this point as well. Knights of Saint.
I do think it's interesting that the origin of the Third Crusade was actually between England and France, and it was when Henry II in England and Philip II in France, they ended a war that they were having specifically so they could go on crusade in
That's right.
1187, I think it was. But then, of course, Henry dies in 1189, which means Richard the Lionheart takes over.
Yeah, no, we'll get to that, Andrew. Don't worry, we will get to that point. Saladin invaded the region, invading the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Crusader state, in July 1187. And then, of course, you had the massive defeat at the hills of Hattin near Galilee. And this was a terrible defeat, not just for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. I mean, for the Kingdom of Jerusalem, this was catastrophic, but it was also the loss of the relic of the True Cross, which was kind of the big shockwave that went through Europe, and it animated the clergy, particularly the Pope and many bishops, to try and put out the call for crusade. And in many ways, as you mentioned, we'd get onto it, but there was a papal, I guess like a papal bull, issued saying that Christian knights or nobility who had their fiefs couldn't engage in war with each other, whether it be king or a count or baron or what have you, for 7 years, because this was like your entire attention has to be on the Crusades, and in some ways, this is where you see the clergy actually condemning those in some of those kingdoms in Christendom, as the reason why this happened was because of your sin and pride and all that sort of stuff. So there was a very, very strong reaction from the church. So the king at the time was captured. So this would have been, I think at this point, Baldwin had died at this point, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, well, he
was already dead before Hattin.
Yeah, he was dead before Hattin.
Yes, well, that's because it was Guy who obviously led. Because that is one bit of Kingdom of Heaven that's accurate. Baldwin dies. His nephew Baldwin V ascends, and has a regency under Raymond III, the Count of Tripoli. Then he dies of an illness. So he's, again, going back to Kingdom of Heaven, the whole, Sibylla mercy killing him for allegedly having leprosy is not true. Baldwin did just die of an illness, and then Sibylla, being the closest relative, because she's married to Guy, the lords of the Holy Land elect Guy king as the obviously spouse of Sibylla, and then that's how he becomes king, and then he leads the army to Hattin.
Yeah, and he was captured. Most soldiers were. I mean, I think most were who were taken prisoner were killed. Very few survived. And then you had some Templars who survived the battle, were also executed. And of course, as we mentioned, Saladin personally killed Reynold of Chatillon, as well, the one that we mentioned with his little raiding and pirate side quest earlier on. And then Saladin would then gain control over the region.
Stupid battle, by the way, William, Hattin, because Saladin led the Christian forces right out into the desert, away from any water and what have you. And of course, the Christian forces' main striking element was the knights on horses, and horses don't do very well without water. So
it's kind of a weird one, because Guy Lusignan, he'd been involved in quite many battles. He'd also been involved, as we mentioned, in the ambush where he captured William Marshall, the famous William Marshall, when he was a lot younger, when Guy was younger. And so he knows about ambushes, he knows about picking the terrain as well. And maybe it was a gamble, maybe there was bad intel on like the size of the force. I don't know, but it is a bit of a. I don't know why he left Jerusalem. I don't know why he went out into the desert to fight the battle. It's a bit of a.
Well, it's not just that though, William. It's that he didn't just go out into the desert. He went further and further and further into the desert. It's like there was time after time he could have said, "Okay, we're going to turn back now," but he didn't.
Maybe I'm just sort of guessing. Maybe he thought that this sort of gamble Saladin wouldn't expect it, and they'd be thrown off guard or something. I don't know, but. Advisors giving bad advice, possibly. This is the thing. It's it could be that there were too many. One thing you notice, and this is something that I've when I've been reading up on the Third Crusade, is because you had so many knightly orders and very powerful families, obviously who had their who made up the court. I imagine in the army you had these very, very different positions of what to do. And there wasn't like and this is something you'll see with Emperor Barbarossa when he begins his crusade, even though it doesn't go as planned. But you can't deny his army is completely united, and there is no dissent. Absolutely zero dissent, and that's one thing the crusading armies before had, particularly in the first, but in the second crusade, you had these very, very silly and disagreements, which would descend into either splits or
William, when we come to the Battle of Asuf, which was Richard the Lionheart's great victory over Saladin, even in that battle, one of the knightly orders, I'm not sure if it was the Templars or the other guys, but one of them, they disobeyed orders and charged when they weren't supposed to. Like his English soldiers were well disciplined and controlled, but the knightly orders in the Holy Land were not always. So and Mitch is saying it was the Knights Hospitaller. So I'm sure Mitch is right about that.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, after the fall of Jerusalem, of course, Jerusalem would surrender, Acre would surrender, and the only two remaining Crusader states would be the county of Tripoli in the north there, under oh
Oh well, Raymond of Tripoli dies in
Raymond
the
Tripoli.
same year as Hattin, and then he's succeeded by hang on, Raymond the Fourth. Yeah, funny fact about the county of Tripoli: all the rulers are called Raymond.
Yeah,
Imagine his
that was
bunch.
I was I was looking up because I had my notes here like Raymond, and it was like, well, hold on a sec, there's like, hold on, in the last episode wasn't there a Raymond as well? Surely it can't be the same same one. No,
Yeah,
yeah.
the Raymond the First and Raymond the Third are both known as Raymond of Tripoli. So just to confuse you. So,
Oh, that's annoying.
well, Raymond the First is also known as Raymond of Toulouse because that's where he was from originally. But that's by the by.
Yeah. Oh, yes, true. And then also the Principality of Antioch. Now the kingdom of, well, I guess you could say the um what was left of the kingdom of Jerusalem was, of course, in the little city of Tyre, the historic city of Tyre. Ancient historians, of course, we mentioned on your channel, Bede, was the city that Alexander the Great besieged during his conquest. But at this point, the surviving knights and Templars and stuff went to Tyre, and this is sort of the point that triggers the call from the West, the loss of Jerusalem, effectively loss of the kingdom of Jerusalem, and the loss of the holy relics. So the
Well,
news sorry.
yeah, just to come in quickly about Tyre. Well, you call that a little city. Well, no, Tyre was a large city. It was probably one of the most hardest to take cities in the region because of its fortifications. And ultimately, this is one of the reasons why the Kingdom of Jerusalem is able to survive, and Richard the Lionheart is able to take back most of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, at least on the coast, because Saladin, when he's taking all of these different strongholds, he considers sieging Tyre, but he crucially chooses not to, fearing it's too difficult to take. I don't want to risk losing too many men trying to take something I won't be able to, so I'll just take other places. And this is a crucial error on Saladin's part, because Tyre would, obviously being the only port, it would allow Crusaders to receive supplies, food, provisions, and men to then eventually launch a counterattack. So a bit of a fatal error there on Saladin's part, not taking Tyre.
Yeah, no, sorry. When I meant tiny little city, I didn't mean it. I meant it on like the context of talk about the map bead, not the actual historical layout.
But it was
Yeah, I know.
it was very difficult to attack because a lot of it was offshore, and there was only like a causeway you could attack on, and
Yes.
that makes it very difficult to take somewhere.
Well, it was very difficult for Alexander back in the day, as we
yes,
talked
it
about.
was. He had to build land bridges to get to it, even. So yeah,
Well, it was
for
a
sure.
bit built the causeway as well. I mean,
Yeah,
it was bogged down for ages. I mean, and of course, Mitch says Tyre was the Phoenicians originally came from, which then would migrate and become the Carthaginians. So it's important part, in general, and it's this would be the sort of holdout and be the lifeline for the continuation of a crusade and restoration for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So news had reached the West in the autumn of the same year, so this is 1187. Pope Urban III had died, though, in October, of a stroke upon hearing these events, allegedly. And then only 10 days, the new Pope, Gregory the VIII, was proclaimed and or elected, I should say, and then he was his first new decree was to sending out a proclamation of a new crusade, and the proclamation is as followed. Therefore, it is incumbent upon all to both consider and choose to amend our sins with the voluntary chastisement and through repentance and acts of piety to turn to the Lord our God. We must first correct the evil we have done within ourselves and then attend to the filth and malice of our enemies. Therefore, think, my children, how you came into this world and how you will depart from it, how all things pass away, and you also will pass away, and receive the time for repentance and for doing good, as far as it is up to you, with gratitude, for perhaps he willed to try and come to the knowledge of others. If there is anyone who is intelligent or seeking the Lord, who joyfully embraces the time of repentance offered to him and laying down his life for his brothers, will be consumed in a short time and fulfill many ages, having heard the awesome things. So this is the sort of wider proclamation. And as I mentioned earlier, Gregory viewed this at the fall of Jerusalem as God's punishment, particularly on the sins that was existing at the time, particularly the conflicts within Western Christian nations over territory, land, and what have you.
And this should have been a very successful crusade. I mean, it was anyway to a large degree, but it should have taken back Jerusalem, to be honest, because by far the largest contingent was Frederick Barbarossa's from the Holy Roman Empire. But as I'm sure you're going to explain shortly, that didn't work out entirely as expected. And then the second biggest contingent was the French. And because the French are the French, that didn't work out as expected. And then, of course, the smallest one was actually Richard the Lionheart and his Englishmen. So, and these Normans, of course. But if all of those forces had actually fought in the Holy Land, they would have taken back Jerusalem almost certainly. As it was, Richard came quite close to doing that, but he wasn't willing to risk the destruction of his army at the end, which he would have had to have to take Jerusalem.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, and it's also important to remember at this point, England, this is under Henry II. The realm of England obviously includes modern day England as England as we understand it, but also Normandy and Aquitaine, Poitiers, Anjou, Brittany, this is what was called the Angevin Empire, and particularly this expanded due to his marriage with Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was married to Philip, and so this was the I guess you could say that this sort of like conflict has multiple layers, but they were both Henry and Philip met I say largely due to pressure from their own bishops and clergy in the church at a border town in between the French realm and Normandy, somewhere the border town Normandy. And they were sat down and they were given a very I guess you could say they heard the deliberation from the Pope and the clergy, and they were swayed. Effectively, they were said, "Listen, you cannot be killing Christians. We need to unite for the greater, for the greater good and for the Christendom, and fight against Saladin." and both of them put in place a tithe, which was called like a Saladin tithe, to finance the expeditions as well. But they both came to an agreement. And yes, so we mentioned Emperor Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire. He managed to, and he was now when we talked about in the Second Crusade. I don't know if we mentioned it, Bede, but Frederick Barbarossa was present during the Second Crusade. He was obviously he was with Conrad, and he saw, as we mentioned last time, the chaotic marching across Anatolia and the constant attacks from uh, the the Sultanate of the Roman Turks in the Anatolian plateau, and so he saw firsthand where the poor planning, but also the I guess a lack of discipline as well within the armies, the crusading force. And so with this one, within his force, it obviously made up of the imperial army, but also it was made up of direct knights that would it was entirely led by him. There wasn't like a it wasn't like a sort of like a democratic in the sense of various voices are equal. It's like no, I'm calling the show. And he also instituted punishment. So what would happen in previous crusades, Duke? Crusaders would go through Christian lands, whether it be Hungary or those in the Balkans, and you would have soldiers who would go off like looting, raping, pillaging, all that sort of stuff, and forging. And this would anger the local population. This would anger the Byzantine emperor, fearful, what have you. There'll be a lot of mistrust, and then something would go wrong down the line. What Barbarossa was able to do was he instituted a policy that anyone who was caught stealing, or no, sorry, anyone that was caught, basically trying to molest a woman in any of these realms would have their hands cut off. Pillaging and looting would be instant hanging. And that was, and drunkenness as well would be punished by whipping. So all the things that went on to some degree among the sort of main ranks would be punished. And so this was and also for religious purposes, this was a very pious man. He was, how old was he at this point? Bede about 70. He was quite old at this point. But
What?
Barbarossa.
I believe so. I would need to double check. Hang on.
I imagine. I think he was.
Okay. He was born December 1122 and died 1190. So that's hang on. He was 67.
67. Okay, yes. So yeah. So for
And
that time,
he did have some military success on this crusade, but I think it was mostly in the Sultanate of Rum, which is on your map at the top there. And those would have been Turkic people, Bede?
Yeah, the Sultanate of Rum was a Turkic state in the center of formerly Byzantine Anatolia.
and just to give, I like to give the geographic bit of this to people. Do you see the curvatures of the Armenian Sicilia there, and the that small bit of purple Byzantine realm, Duke, in the south of what's now Turkey? The bit of territory there. That's part of the low plateau. The Sultanate of the Rum, the reason why they were able to occupy a vast bit of realm of in the hinterland of Anatolia is largely because one, it was quite largely sparsely populated compared to the other regions, but also it was in the high plateau, and so this is sort of your mountain men region, if you will. This is where you would have the mountains and this I you know, of Cappadocia, Isauria, that sort of region there, that would be the homeland of Turkic warriors, Turkmen coming in and settling the land there.
And poor old Barbarossa, he falls into a river on his horse and drowns, I believe.
He was actually bathing, and I just
Yeah.
think, yeah.
I thought he was crossing it on his horse, but I'm sure you're correct. But yeah, he ends up dying in a river, basically because he was an old guy and maybe the current was a bit too much for him. And then, of course, this really upsets all his German knights and soldiers and what have you. And the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of them just decide to go home and take Frederick's body back, I guess.
Unfortunately, it was he came unstuck and as we know, drowned. I mean, it's quite interesting because there's some accounts that say that he fell. Others say that, as you mentioned, he was actually bathing. I think he fell those. I think he was bathing and it may have slipped and you know, or something. I don't know. But he ended up drowning. And it was his son who it was his son who took over, I believe, who was the Duke of Swabia. Let me just bring up the was it Conrad?
What, the son of Barbarossa?
Yeah. Was it Conrad or am I
I'll need to
mixing?
double check.
I know his son effectively took over as Duke of Swabia and sort of leader of the of his army.
Yeah, Frederick V, Duke of Swabia.
Frederick V. Okay, and then Heinrich. Heinrich succeeded him as Holy Roman Emperor, but his son continued.
Oh, sorry, wrong. No, he had two sons Frederick V, Duke of Swabia, was a son of his that died in childbirth, and then he had another son called Conrad II, Duke of Swabia. That was sorry.
Oh, sorry. So it is Conrad. Okay, yeah. And Heinrich, that Mitch mentioned, that was the emperor that succeeded him, because of course they had the electorate system for Holy Roman Emperor and King of the Romans in Germany and what have you. So, yes, but his son continued or tried to continue as much of the operation as possible.
But most of the German army went home. Most of it.
Yeah,
and
most
they were the biggest contingent. And of course, partly as a result of that, the French kind of used that. The French king used that as an excuse, and he went home too and took most of his soldiers as well. So
yeah. So the emperor's son, Frederick of Swabia, the Duke, led the remaining 5,000 men. So that was like what was left to Antioch. Now Frederick, his body was boiled to remove the flesh, which was interned within the Church of Saint Peter, and then his and this was quite common back then. Is you would have body parts and parts of organs would sort of go to various different cathedrals and churches around and about after one's death, and bones and what have you. Sometimes this would be done in the hope that upon your death you would be canonized as a saint. That was one of the reasons why, but also it was done as you know, as a symbol, status symbol. Frederick asked for the assistance of Conrad of Montefort to lead him to safety to Acre by way of Tyre, with Frederick's bones were buried. Now, while they didn't, they weren't able to engage in the crusade, they did capture the during Frederick's crusade, the capital of the Seljuk Sultanate, and killed a considerable number of Turkish soldiers, and sort of weakened the Sultanate of the Rum in the process. Anywho,
The French, William, the French.
The French, yeah. So afterwards, we mentioned Henry II and Philip II ending their war, and sort of coming to this agreement. You had the sort of mustering preparation for it, and this was done by the Baldwin of Ford, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and he made a tour through Wales as well, convincing 3,000 men at arms to take up the cross, and particularly in parts of Wales which weren't under the control of England. So this was, seeking from all over the British Isles. But before
Richard has a very interesting time on his way to the Crusades. He conquers Cyprus and all sorts of things.
Yeah, no, we will get to that. Don't worry.
No, I know. I understand what you're saying, William. But I was just thinking, if you're going to do this logically, having dealt with Barbarossa and the Holy Roman Empire, you'd probably be best to deal with the French next.
Yeah.
Because those guys also didn't hang around too long, sadly. Most of them.
No. So Henry II, just sort of speed this along. Henry II died. So of course Richard succeeded him, and then began to raise funds for the crusade. And then Richard's fleet departed from Dartmouth under the command of Richard de Camfil and Robert de Sarbe, on the way to meet meet up with him at Marseille. And there was a bit of I think some of them did stop to help the Portuguese again in the Portuguese monarch defeats some Muslim attack in just outside Lisbon, but that's just wasn't as like the Second Crusade. It was a shorter endeavor. And then Richard and Philip II met in France and set out together on the 4th of July, 1190, as far as Lyon, and then they parted way after agreeing a rendezvous point in Sicily. Richard and his retinue said to number about 800, and marched to Marseille, and then Philip went via Genoa. So Richard arrived Marseille. He had to end up hiring ships because his fleet hadn't arrived because they were messing around in Portugal. So he hired ships for Sicily in early August. And
Richard had a lot more soldiers than 800 men, but I'm sure that would have been like his knightly retinue of knights and men at arms and what have you. But he had a lot more foot soldiers and what have you, and crossbowmen and all the rest of it. So he had a lot more than 800 men.
No, what it was is when he got to Marseille, he arrived with just 800 men, and then the various nobility would be pouring in because they didn't
with their own contingents.
yeah,
Yeah,
with their own
sorry.
contingency.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, what it wasn't like Barbarossa where they were marching through the French the countryside in like a single column like Barbarossa. They would meet in smaller units.
And England used ships because we're an island.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right, because two big contingents which I mentioned earlier, Robert de Sable and Richard de Camville, they were coming via ships. They were having to go round Spain, Portugal, through the Mediterranean to the Straits of Gibraltar that way. But and then so Richard, upon hiring ships, due to not wanting to wait, arrived in Messina in September, and then the English fleet, delayed, arrived in Marseille towards late August. So they missed each other about a month. There was a month like of where they were sort of missed, and then upon arriving to Marseille and finding that Richard had already sailed directly to Messina, they went off immediately, sailed to Messina to try and catch up. And then Philip hired a Genoese fleet to transport his army, which was about 650 knights, 1,300 horsemen, 1,300 squires, to the Holand by Sicily. When it comes to footmen and we don't know the actual direct number.
People didn't count them in those days. They just say a host, or an army.
A host, yeah.
Yeah, the ordinary dudes who we all would have been if we'd have been around then, never got counted in actual numbers.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I will say though, 650 knights. Bear in mind, their knights, they would have their own fiefdoms, which is where the men would come from. 650.
That's a big force.
It's a big force.
And bear in mind, most of the squires would have been men at arms, so they would have dressed the same as knights and used the same weapons, pretty much. So that's a big armored force. And of course, your footmen, even in those days, and your crossbowmen would also have a certain amount of armor as well. So but the ordinary guys weren't largely counted back then. And like, if you do history, and you two guys do, of course, you'll know that like anything pre-modern in terms of numbers, they're always kind of guesstimates anyway. So
Yeah, there's so you can sort of guess, and
a million Persians at the Battle of Gaugamela.
Yeah. It's like what the sources. How many they say? Like a million or something like that. That's what was it, a couple million or something like that. By one account.
Well, of course, nowadays what happens is modern historians will go the complete other way, and they'll probably make the forces too small. That's what happens these days. So the truth is probably somewhere in between, really. But I think the Persians, when they invaded when they invaded Greece, like, people often say, oh yeah, they had 500,000 men or 1 million men. They almost certainly didn't, because they couldn't have supplied that many men. But they might have had 100,000.
Certainly plausible.
Yeah, 100,000. I mean, the Roman army, the legions at their max in Pax Romana was probably, I've seen estimates about 250,000 at max, maybe 200,000, like compiling of all the legions.
Well, there were about 30 legions at the height of Rome, and a legion at full strength was about 5,500 men. But you also have to remember there were at least as many auxiliary soldiers who were also regular troops of the Roman Empire. So you've got 30 legions of about 5,000 men. But then you need to double that because of all the auxiliaries.
Yeah.
Also, the Roman Empire under Justinian, it's believed to have had something like 500,000 men as well. So
for sure, Bede. Yeah, for sure, it might have. Most of the modern historians of Rome, of ancient Rome, they think that the later Roman Empire army was probably smaller than it was under people like Trajan, when the army was probably at its height. Because although it might have had more units, those units were smaller. By the time you get to Constantine and anyone beyond him, the legions are not 5,000 men; they're less than that by then.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I mentioned the Richard's army travelled in very small, like 800 here, maybe 1,000, but a couple hundred here. With why he had to space it out was because largely, and this was my reading of my campaign book on the Osprey campaign book on the Third Crusade, largely was because of the road networks at the time. They couldn't, it just wasn't possible. You could cause a pretty chaotic time if you were traveling by like the one like road network from northern France to Marseille through the south, and you had to travel in relatively smaller units, just to keep not sort of causing a blockage in highway and cause have these logistical problems
and
in
even
various towns.
even the ships back then, William, were much smaller than they would later become. So you could only carry a limited number of fighting men, and also their horses, of course, on a medieval ship in the late 1100s. They weren't huge, great things like HMS Victory. They were much smaller than that.
Well, that's why they hired the Genoese and likes of Venetians, because they were developing at this point. The Genoese were known for their ship. I mean, they've always been known for their shipbuilding, but even now they were very, very good shipbuilders and be able to build a lot of ships very quickly as well. They were and also there was this permanent fleet that they could just hire, as well for transportation.
Well, there was really no difference in those days. There wasn't much difference between a warship and a merchant ship.
No.
You put a few more guns and crossbowmen on a merchant ship, and it's a warship, basically.
Yeah. Richard arrived in Sicily, and one of the sort of first problems he had was William II of Sicily had died the previous year and was placed by Tancred, who imprisoned William II's wife, who also happened to be Richard's sister, Joan of England.
That was a mistake on the part of the guy.
Yeah. Tancred was, from my reading, he was a bit of an asshole. He was just a total twat. This was about sort of powers. But so in response, Richard captured the city of Messina on the 4th of October 1190, and Joan was released. But because of this, Richard and Philip fell out over the issue of Richard's marriage, as at this time he decided to marry Bernigeria of Navarre, and breaking off his long-standing betrothal to Philip's half-sister. And so Philip decided to leave Sicily directly for the Middle East on the 30th of March 1191, and then arrived in Tyre in April. and he joined the siege of Acre on the 20th of April. Richard did not set off from Sicily until April, the 10th of April, so quite later. And shortly after setting sail, Richard's armada of 180 ships and 39 galleys was then struck by a storm, and then several ships ran aground, including one holding Joan and his new fiancée, and a large amount of treasure that had been amassed for the crusade. And they ran aground, of course, on Cyprus, off the coast of Cyprus, near Limassol. And the island of Cyprus, which was part of the Byzantine Empire, had actually been taken over by a sort of a rogue local ruler, Isaac Ducas Comnenus, who was, I guess you could say, like in a, what would you say, Bede? He was like ruling the island as his personal, sort of separate from the actual control of Constantinople, somewhat gone rogue.
Effectively, yeah.
Yeah, and he had seized the treasure and taken effectively poor Joan hostage again. She couldn't catch a break at this time, and also his fiancée as well. Both had taken hostage on the 6th of May. Richard entered Limassol with his retinue on the 6th of May as well, and met with Isaac, who agreed to return Richard's belongings and send 500 of his soldiers to the Holy Land. Richard made a camp at Limassol, where he received a visit from Guy of Lusignan, the king of Jerusalem, and married Bergina, who was crowned queen as well. And they were married at the, I believe it was the church of St. Lazarus, which I've been to. Was not too far from where I lived when we lived in Cyprus. So there's a plaque there as well, because that's where.
Is it the same building, William?
Parts of it is a lot.
Cool. That's really cool.
A lot of the sort of dome sort of. I was going to say there's like a church tower, which I think was from the Venetian age, but the main body of it, yes, was from that time. And there's a little plaque in there saying that at this spot, King Richard the Lionheart married the future Queen of England. And
it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, mate. I wish I'd been there. That would be good. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's and it's quite close to the ocean front. It's a very pretty place. I will not lie. And also the jetty where he landed as well. There's a lighthouse there, and it was called by some of the Brits out there as Richard's Landing. It has a Greek name, but we just called it Richard's Landing. I wanted to call the bridge Lionheart's Bridge, but it never cottoned on. So yeah. So when Isaac got back to his fortress at Famagusta, he broke his oath and hospitality and began issuing orders for Richard to leave the island. And because Isaac was a half-wit who underestimated Richard, Richard was able to muster his men and then conquer the island within days. Basically because one, the Greek garrison, the Byzantine garrison on the island, didn't respect Isaac, and very much did respect Richard for his will and levels of generosity, and also
damn good soldier, Richard the Lionheart. You can say what you like about him, but he was a good soldier. Like he was a good commander. He knew what he was doing in war, as we will see as we get into the Crusade. But he was a shrewd dude.
But Richard's conquest of Cyprus was incredibly important because it meant that for transportation and trade and food and all the things for all the Crusader states, whether it be Antioch, Tripoli, or down to Tyre and with Jerusalem, meant that it had opened up a more reliant and direct access. Cyprus could be a launch pad for
you can see on the map,
launching.
William, you can see on
Yeah.
your map, if you look at Cyprus there, the purple island, it's only really not far off the coast of the Holy Land. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, from Syria, from north, the most easterly point of Cyprus that sticks out at the north end there, I think it's about 50 miles.
Yeah, it's not that far.
Not...
It's not that far. It's fairly short distances, even in the days of sailing ships and galleys that you rode.
We went out on a side story here, when we were living at well, I won't say where in Cyprus, but we we went out on a ship. It was meant to go to Egypt, but they couldn't go. But they were able to take us like around the Med, and we sort of halfway through, we actually followed the coastline down from Syria and Lebanon, and then parts of, well, I guess parts of northern Israel today, Palestine, and particularly Syria, very close. And this would be what the Principality of Antioch and Tripoli region as well, northern part here. So that we were able to see. So yeah.
Also, just to add, regarding Cyprus, Richard would end up giving it to Guy de Lusignan after he was deposed as king of Jerusalem to like sort of fob him off, so he would become the king of Cyprus.
Yes. Yeah, that's so it in some ways
it becomes a crusader outpost, basically.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. Because I think what happens, I think Sibylla dies, and then the Lords of Jerusalem say, right, we don't want you being the king anymore because we only let you have it because your wife was the nominal queen. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's So
I wonder if I could ask Bede, while all this is going on. I mean, obviously Saladin knows that, you know, he would have heard that these Crusaders were heading for the Holy Land, and he would have known about what was happening with Frederick Barbarossa, and probably at least some of Richard's adventures in the Eastern Mediterranean. What's Saladin doing all this time, Bede?
Well, ultimately, he's just securing as much of territory as he can and preparing for the Crusader counterattack. But as I said earlier, I think he's probably a bit too passive because he should have really have tried to have at least taken Tyre. Because if he knocked that out, it would have been much harder for Richard to have made a landing.
For sure, absolutely for sure. Yeah, like I said, I mean, if all three of these powerful Christian monarchs had arrived actually in the Holy Land alive, I think they would have retaken Jerusalem without much doubt, to be honest. But we've already, like, poor old Frederick Barbarossa is already dead, and dismembered and taken back to Germany and what have you. Richard has had all these adventures, but he's just about on the point of landing. And of course, then we've got the French. And this is something I'm hoping that William and Bede will enlighten me on, because I've never quite got why it was that the French king, when he got there, didn't hang around for very long and just pissed off back to France with most of his men.
Well,
I
he
think he,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Bede.
yeah, I think he was just being opportunistic because he helps sort of take back some territory and then buggers off. I suspect that I think he was wanting to take advantage of the fact that the King of England is in the Holy Land, and obviously, as you know, Philip Augustus would take advantage of the death of Richard the Lionheart to give King John a good thrashing and take back most of France. So I think there's some intrigues going on there. Perhaps I think
so it's just the French being French, basically.
yeah,
Also,
pretty much.
Yeah, it's also worth remembering as well that most of the families that were fighting over, who had territory from the previous crusades, and titles and stuff, were at this point, I guess you see, a lot of some of them were under the English Avignon rule. You had the House of Anjou. You had, I mean, yes, you had French nobility presence as well, but at this point, Bede mentions the Philip wanted to turn the tide back at home, and I think he didn't. Well, I don't think he believed it was a worthy endeavor. I think there was, because he literally did very little, and the problem is you had a lot of Norman knights still going. It was, in many ways, it was more pressing. It was more important for probably Richard and the Normans and English and Aquitanians and others to and his vassals to go there, because they had cousins or relatives involved with the previous crusades and were held titles and more than anything else.
Forgive me, William, but I thought most of the original First Crusaders, the vast majority of those guys were French, weren't they?
Yes, the First Crusade. I mean, the Crusades as a whole were heavily francophone. Duke. I mean, there's a reason the Holy Land was known as the Outre-mer, from the French across the sea.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
so in a way,
yeah.
you'd think that the French king would have more reason to persevere with this crusade than Richard does, although that's not what happens. The only king who actually carries on with it is Richard.
But you have to remember, at this point, the King of France didn't actually control most of France directly.
Yeah, no, I understand that, William. Of course I understand that. But the point I'm making is that the original Crusaders, the First Crusaders, were mostly Frenchmen, as Bede agrees with me on. And so you would have thought that if family was coming into this and relatives and all the rest of it, then you would have thought the French king would hang about. But no, he doesn't do that. He pisses off back to France. And as you say, tries to take advantage of the fact that the English king is still in the Holy Land.
Well, the French king, I believe it was the Carpathian dynasty, the ruling. The thing though is, you are right. Like, for him directly, he had no direct reason apart from the religious aspect of it, piety and prestige and all that sort of stuff.
And of course, because he was there for a little while, he was able to say, "Oh yeah, I'm a Crusader king." But in fact, he pissed off before anything was really done. I think he did. Was he still there when Accra was captured? I'm not sure. I think he was. But he pissed off just after that, I believe.
It was just after that. But yeah, I mean, I would say, Duke, he was pressured, but to stop the war, he was pressured by the church and the bishops in his kingdom at the time, but also by his vassals. Bear in mind, you had like Toulouse, for example, had direct, as we mentioned, Tripoli, that had a direct connection there. You also had, that of Antioch as well. His vassals were probably more concerned and more like, literally haranguing him for saying we need to do something now. And it probably was that level of pressure from the church and his vassals that said, "Okay, guys, yeah, I have to do something. I can't ignore it. I can't pull a Keir Starmer and just ignore this. I have to do something." I mean, he didn't obviously say that bit, 'cause he didn't know who Keir Starmer was, but you get my point. He didn't bury his head in the sand and pretend it wasn't a problem. He had to deal with it. It was and he had to rise to the occasion. That's why. I mean, he didn't want to have a peace agreement with Henry. He hated Henry. Despised him.
Yeah. No, I know that.
Yeah,
But
yeah. He
but my point is that this massive crusade, which, as I say, should have retaken Jerusalem, it breaks down first of all because Frederick Barbarossa dies in an accident, and then the French king just pisses off and tries to take advantage of the English king not being there back in England. I mean, it's just interesting to me, I mean, it's like it ends up being Richard's crusade basically, and Richard, spoilers, guys, does quite well. But I guess we're going to move on to the siege of Acre, and there's a lot of nonsense talked about this, and particularly the aftermath of it.
So I do want to talk about this now. Is this the one? And guys, correct me if I'm wrong. Is this the one where Richard is on the boat and he's coming ashore landing? He sees like a gap or like a position where the weakness in the city, and he decides to basically just grab his axe and what have you and go charging in there, and his knights have to try and catch up to him, and he's just sort of going in there chopping Saracens left and right.
Bede.
I believe this is the that's according to both the Muslim and Christian chroniclers at the time.
I do know that Richard is able to use his fleet to cut off a car from getting supplies via the sea, which of course is a big help in taking the place, because it means they can't get supplies anymore, like food and what have you. But the reason it's controversial is that at the end of it, Richard ends up chopping the heads off a lot of captured Saracens and Arabs. But the thing is, he did exactly the same as Saladin when he captured Jerusalem. Like, now, again, we've talked about this fucking terrible film, The Kingdom of Heaven. In that, Saladin lets everyone go from Jerusalem. That's not true at all. It's rubbish. He let people go who paid a ransom. So, in other words, only a few rich people got away from Jerusalem when he captured it. The others were all either executed or enslaved, which was the normal thing that happened back then if you lost, if you were an ordinary person. And Richard did exactly the same. When they capture Acre, he offers to ransom anyone Saladin wants to ransom, and Saladin just says, "No, I'm not ransoming anybody." So Richard can't guard all these people, and he can't feed all these people, so he executes them, which was pretty normal for those days, to be honest.
Yeah, I was just having a look. Yeah, this was he basically what had happened is Richard got bit, and he had a habit of doing this. He would sort of go charging in there, trying to apparently the city gates were left open, and he was hoping that if he could get in there, he'd be able to go capture the city gate, and then this would be like a massive blunder. Of course, that wasn't successful, and he was sort of forced to go back. But he did get inside the city briefly and was engaged in a bit of fighting. And then, of course, there was a besiegement. And when the city did fall, there was a bit of Richard not. He decided, because he viewed that it was his siege effort and his army that sort of was successful. he removed the, like, very publicly, he like threw down from the battlements the heraldry of the Leopold and the various German contingents who were there, and saying, no, you guys didn't. This is sort of my victory and all that. So, which did anger a few of the German contingents present, and I think these were the Austrians actually, predominantly, like Leopold. So
Yeah, but to be fair, Richard's contingent by this time, because most of the Holy Roman Empire guys had pissed off. There were still some there, as you say,
yeah,
and there was still a few Frenchmen there, but there weren't many. It was mostly by this stage the local Crusader forces and Richard's English and Normans.
The only French, well, this is the thing, the only French force, and I say quote unquote French because there was Vermandois, Flanders, and then the Richard. They was really the like aspects. So you did have French knights that we understand, but they weren't under the direct sort of vassalage of the King of France. They were sworn to Richard.
No, most of those guys pissed off and went home with their king. Yes.
Yeah, it was only the contingent from Vermandois and Flanders that was still with Richard, because Flanders was actually, I don't know if Flanders was part of the Angevin Empire at the time. I don't know if it was.
No, it wasn't. No, it was part of France.
No, it was. It wasn't. No, and neither was Vermandois. But the Flanders and Vermandois, their families, their royal families, had particularly Flanders had important titles and land that they wanted to regain in the Holy Land. So that's why for them they were, and the thing is, the kings at that time, they couldn't actually call their vassals, say, if they wanted to say, oh, that's it, we're heading off home, it was optional. A lot of, it didn't have to. I mean, most of them did because they didn't have, the will, and there was also the financial bits, they couldn't continue it. But on the whole, if your family had a stake in the Holy Land when it comes to land and territory and estates, those were the guys that stayed.
Well, and also the guys who took the religious bit seriously, and back then a lot of people did, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be honest, we won't mention that. Look, when it comes to the executions of prisoners, you didn't have a Geneva Convention back then, so yeah, it happened.
It did, but the thing that annoys me is that sometimes in movies, and I'll give you another example, the same bloke, I think, who made that awful Kingdom of Heaven movie made a Robin Hood.
Ridley Scott, yeah.
Yeah, he also made Robin Hood, right? Which is not a terrible film, but its history is bullshit. And Robin Hood in that movie is supposed to have been a crusader. And he's upset with what Richard did at Acre. And that's nonsense, because nobody would have been. Because Richard did exactly the same as Saladin did when he captured Jerusalem. He said, if you can pay your ransom, I'll let you go. If you can't, I'll either execute you or enslave you. That's what everyone did back then. This is 1189. It's not the 20th century.
I mean, as you know, Duke, I mean, at Agincourt, Henry V was forced to execute some of the French prisoners, and that's because it was a desperate situation. They couldn't have a load of French raiding around the back of the English army, and so it was harsh times. You had to do brutal acts.
And even then, Bede, many of the English soldiers were pretty half-hearted about killing these guys because they could make a lot of money from them if they were rich, So yeah.
I mean, also, and I don't know, maybe Bede would know about this. I know that in some contexts, armies would raise certain banners to signify, like, listen, we aren't going to be taking prisoners. Of course, the French would do this with the orange banner, l'orange, the banner to basically say, and this was done at Crécy, I believe, and I think possibly at Poitiers, but
You mean the oriflamme?
Araflan, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, the oriflamme it was called, and it meant no quarter and no prisoners.
Yeah, no prisoners. And in the Islamic world, I think there was one similar. There was like a similar sort of thing, that there would be a signifier of that as well. And it was quite common in armies, in general, and even going back to ancient times. So, look, they would try, because of ransom. Think about it. You have to get as much money out of it as possible. The high-ranking nobility, so like from king to dukes, right? You'll try and take them hostage, because if you get them, you could get like a peace agreement or a treaty. So that's always like your desired goal. Anyone below that, yeah, you're dead.
Well, not necessarily. Even minor nobility, if you're an ordinary soldier in the Middle Ages, say, and you capture a knight or a baronet, say, you can make money off that guy if you're an ordinary man at arms.
I don't know how the Muslims do.
I don't know I don't know at all how it worked with the Muslims. I'm sure Bede will know more about that. But in Christendom, like anyone of any rank was worth a certain amount of money in terms of ransom.
Well, in nobility sense, that is true. But when it came to the Islamic world and Christian armies, I imagine, they would. I mean, they would take prisoners, but as we mentioned, Saladin did execute knights and nobility, and Christian nobility without any.
Mitch is pointing out in the chat that because Saladin didn't hold up his end of the deal after the siege of Acre, a lot of the Muslim soldiers didn't want to be garrisons for him, because they knew damn well that if they were captured by the Christians, he wouldn't ransom them, because he didn't.
Yeah, and Richard knew this. That's why he did it, because he wanted this. You see, Richard wasn't. In some ways, he understood that by doing so, it would create a level of disunity within Saladin's.
Richard was a damn good soldier, as I said. He was a good general. He really was. He knew what he was doing. This is why he had been successful in Sicily and in Cyprus even before he arrived in the Holy Land. I mean, yes, he was a bit rash sometimes, dashing up to an open gate, and eventually that would get him killed, of course. A crossbowman killed him because he got too close. But none of us are perfect, but he was actually a good commander.
Yeah. So the Battle of Arsuf. So after Acre, Richard marched towards the city of Jaffa, and then
I've got a picture for you, William, if you want it. Hang on, let me see if I can load it.
All right. If you can share it.
Yeah, I'll share it and you can put it up. If you haven't got it yourself, that is, of course. Where are we? This is, I think it's this one. There you go. This is Richard's march after Acre.
Yeah. And
the green lines are Saladin's forces, and the purple line is Richard and his forces, which are mostly English, but he's also got like the Hospitallers and the other knightly orders from
Flanders and Templars.
He's got other guys as well. Yeah. I think it's worth pointing out that Richard, by the way, despite being a Norman, he spoke English. He could speak English because he spent his early years in England, and he learned English from his wet nurse. And also, of course, it's worth pointing out that this was the time when St. George becomes really closely associated with England, because Richard's English soldiers used St. George as a battle cry in the Third Crusade in 1189 to 92. So, you know, next time it's St. George's Day and some lefty says, oh, he was a Turk, blur and blur and blur and all this other bullshit they come up with. English soldiers were using St. George's name as a battle cry in this war we're talking about now.
Yeah. He was also martyred in Palestine as well, so he was in this neck of the woods anyway.
Yeah, and of course St. George was not a Turk. He was a Greek-speaking Roman Christian soldier, but there we go.
A Roman officer, quite high in Diocletian's court. And,
he obviously, he was an officer, but he was a Christian Roman soldier. He was no sort of Turk. At the time that St. George was actually alive, the Turks were somewhere in Central Asia. They certainly weren't in what is today called Turkey.
No. Actually, Bede, just thinking, mentioning the Romans, what do you notice about the formation of the crusading army? Because they are pretty much copying the Roman, going back to the Roman conquest of Britain. They're following a very, very, and also Belisarius's conquest of North Africa from the Vandals are very similar tactics, where you're marching down the coast and then in parallel with the fleet following as well. This is your they were using this as a Roman formation tactic.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah, this is a Roman formation, which is quite, I mean, just goes to show they would still use Roman military
you notice also Richard is determined he's not going to do a Hattin. He's not going to go wandering off into the desert with his force. He's going to stay close to the coast and his fleet so he can get supplies.
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons, because he stuck to the coastline, and Saladin wanted to try and get him drawn into the as you can see on the map here, trying to draw him into the hinterland. It wasn't maybe the desert, but it was the hinterland of Palestine, and he refused. Though you have the Battle of Arsif, and you got Jaffa below here. What did happen is during the battle, north of
William, I've got a map of the Battle of Arsif if you want it.
Yeah, go ahead. So I'll just so Saladin harassed Richard's army into breaking formations in order to defeat it. Though Richard maintained his army's defensive formation following the Roman tactics I'm just mentioning on stream here. So here you go. This is the battle here. Let me just bring this up here. So this is the formation, and this is the formation of Saladin's force. Richard's army, as I said, they managed to remain in formation until the Hospitallers broke ranks to charge to the right wing of Saladin's force, and Richard then ordered a general counterattack, which won the battle. And this was just down to the Hospitallers' quick movement, but also he was able to break the Saracen line, and this resulted in the Muslim army losing 7,000 men. Now, they weren't completely destroyed like Hattin for the Crusaders, but it did result in a complete and utter rout. And this was massive damage to the morale of the Muslims and Saladin, and also led to a lot of criticism.
Worth pointing out, William, that prior to this battle, Saladin had attacked Richard quite a few times, and always he'd been held off because Richard adopted this formation where he had lots of men-at-arms on foot with their shields, as well as a lot of crossbowmen and what have you to counter the Muslims had loads of horse archers, for example,
Yeah.
and they had quite a lot of light cavalry who weren't very heavily armored. They had far less heavily armored troops than the Christians did, which is why when Richard eventually launches this charge, it succeeds, because his guys are much more heavily armored than the Muslim guys are. I mean, I'm sure like Bede will know more about this than I do, but in general terms, the Christian knights and men at arms on horses were much more heavily armored than most of Saladin's guys were.
Well, the Muslims certainly would have access to mail or perhaps scale or lamellar armor. It's true they definitely would have had some lighter cavalry, you know, like horse archers or camel cavalry. But they definitely would have had some that would, I think, would have been the equivalent to the Western Knights in terms of their equipment.
Yeah, but I think they had fewer of them overall in terms of like their overall numbers. Because look, Saladin had a bigger army here than Richard. Historians argue about how much difference there was, but like most people seem to think that Saladin had maybe 20,000 or so men, and Richard had about 9, maybe 10,000. But it was somewhere around there. He was certainly outnumbered about 2 to 1. But most of his guys were better. They had more armor than the Muslim soldiers. Although, as Bede says, yes, of course, the Muslims knew all about mail and all the rest of it. And they had soldiers wearing that stuff. And they did have some guys who would have been kind of cataphracts, which is that sort of that area's equivalent of an armored knight. But they didn't have as many of them as Richard did.
It's also formations, because when the crusading, like take a contingent of knights, like you see in the squares here, they would be tightly packed. And the reason that when they would go into a charge, and I've seen like recreations of this on in real life, when you see how tight, you know, some of them would have shields, but some of them would just have lancers and what have you, and they'd be tightly packed. Now the sort of Mameluke, the Muslim force, their way is that their formation is, it would tend to be, even on horseback, it'd be lines, but when they would do charges, it would be loose. It would be loose. They would be in like a loose formation. And the thing though is, particularly Knights Hospitals, they'd be mounted. If they charge as a unit in heavily plated and what have you, into a loose formation, it was very easy to punch through it. And the thing though is, if they were able to punch through the right flank, so a third of the army was, and this is quite hard to really show on the map here, but you see on the top here, do you see that black black rectangle, you know, that right at the top here?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that block was able to punch through a third of the army. Now Richard saw that and then did the counterattack. And what happened is, effectively, because they were in loose formation, they were surrounded from north, west, western half, northern half, and eastern half. They were surrounded. The route went, I believe, went southwards. So the thing there was, that was the thing, and the problem, that was where the victory was in. And I think that was where the Muslim forces were at their weakest, was because it was the formation that the knights followed. And the funny thing is, and I say I don't know, harp on about the Romans, but if you look at particularly later Roman, like the Byzantine like recapture of against the wars against the Vandals and the Gothic wars, these formations, not necessarily on horseback, but even on foot, but sometimes horseback, quite similar. It's quite similar. I would say
it's
though,
also worth pointing out, William, that what Richard was clever enough to do was that he gave his cavalry, his armored knights and men at arms, he gave them a firm base with the infantry. And if you look at this line, the line that gives them this stability that the cavalry can charge from is infantry. Like it's a mixture of men at arms on foot and crossbowmen and what have you.
Yeah. So actually, I'm just looking up. I just found the map here, and looking at the description. So do you see where it says on the map F? You see where it says F? That's the contingent of the Hospitallers, right? F. They were able to punch through that multiple. I mean, it shows here like 3 line. I don't know how many deep that, but just imagine a large contingent to H. They managed to go from F to H.
I'm guessing in terms of military map conventions, that's trying to show a skirmish line of guys, and then up behind them you've got the Saladin's horsemen.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Saladin's horsemen would come into basically trying to plug up that hole. But the problem is, it doesn't matter because the rest of the knights, the Angevin, the Poitevins, and the English Normans are already flooding through that gap in the army. And at that point, it doesn't matter because the battle is lost. Effectively, that's why they decide to rout, because probably I think Bede was Saladin's brother on the battlefield at this time. I think he was with him on the battlefield.
Yes, his brother, I think, would have been, because he actually was one of his most loyal commanders and actually succeed him as a ruler once Saladin died.
Yeah, that's why. I think he was the one that ordered or convinced him to say no. We need to also like do like a effective general retreat, just a total rout and retreat to save the remainder of the army. Because if you look at the back here, what's to the back of Saladin's force? It's a series of hilltops, rugged, rocky hilltops with trees. If he hadn't retreated, the army would have been. I think it would have been wiped out.
Once you start running away in an ancient or a medieval battle, once you start running away, that's when you start to take really heavy casualties, because it's quite easy to kill people who are running away relative to people who are standing and facing you. So, once the army starts to break, that's when the casualties start to really mount up. Because think about it, if you're chasing guys and they're running and they've got their backs to you, it's not that hard to kill them.
No. And you can see also where can you retreat to? You can't go east because the rocky terrain, as you meant, archers, crossbowmen, you get picked off if you were like doing a retreat, and then also not to mention dismounted forces coming after you anyway. So, and if you're mounted, the only way you can go for the Muslims is south. Now they wouldn't go to Asaf because they effectively you would then be besieged and surrounded. So the only place you can go is this narrow gap where you go south to back towards Jerusalem, Jaffa, and then Jerusalem.
You'll also notice, if you look at it, William, there's a marsh in the middle of the top right side, and you don't want to retreat through that. That's for sure. So
I mean, also you got marsh one side, the sand dunes the other, and the narrow ford. I mean, that sounds like one awful. That's like a very awful sort of like Or
if you're Richard, a good place to give battle. So
yeah, that's right. It's a good place to pick your battles. What was it Caesar said in like his Gallic Wars? He said, never position your army in front of trees or in front of a forest or something, with a forest to the back of you.
People sometimes say that, and people sometimes criticize Wellington for his Waterloo position because there was a wood behind him. And Wellington pointed out, I rode through that wood and the gaps between the trees are huge. We can pull artillery through that very easily. Like he checked beforehand, you know. But the major point about this battle is that after this battle, Saladin realizes that if Richard really wants to go for it, he probably can take Jerusalem.
Yeah, 100. Yeah, 100%.
Because so they end up in a genuine negotiation, because Saladin doesn't really want to fight Richard again because he knows he might not win. And of course, if he loses again, the Crusaders will absolutely take Jerusalem back. On the other hand, Richard, because he's not an idiot, doesn't want to go herring off into the desert because it's quite a long way from the coast to get to Jerusalem. And so they do end up in a genuine negotiation. And Richard is able to allow any Christian pilgrims to visit Jerusalem at any time they want, and Saladin agrees to this basically, and says they won't be harmed or attacked by the Muslims.
Yeah, and they did begin negotiation where when Richard took up his headquarters in Jaffa after capturing the city, and he offered to begin. It was between the negotiation was between Richard and Saladin's brother Al-Adil, known as Saladin, that Bede mentioned earlier. And one of the suggestions was that Richard's sister Joan, poor Joan, who was captured and held hostage twice, was to marry to Al-Adil, or I think the Eleanor niece, the niece of Richard's niece.
And neither of those things happened, but yeah.
Well, the requirement was that Al-Adil would have to convert to Christianity, and that wasn't going to happen. He just flatly refused that, and then Richard marched on to Ascalon, which had been demolished by Saladin previously. It is also worth mentioning that during this time, I'll let it be Bede. I can let you continue this one. It's also worth mentioning at this time that Conrad of Montefrat was assassinated by, I believe it was members of the Hashishin, the Order of the Assassins.
Yes, he was. So he'd been elected King of Jerusalem, and there's an interesting conspiracy theory that because he was somebody who was an enemy of Richard and someone Richard didn't want to be king, there's a conspiracy theory that Richard was in cahoots with the assassins and ordered the hit on Conrad, which I find quite interesting. But I'm not sure if it's something Richard would have done.
There was actually
isn't it true, Bede, that some assassins also once attacked Richard in his bedchamber and he managed to fight them off?
No, that was Longshanks later.
Longshanks.
Oh, sorry. Okay, beg your pardon. Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
That story, by the way, Longshanks, is what happened. A member of the Hashishin attacked, while Edward Longshanks was still in bed, like in sleep. Something woke him, and there's a sketching, painting you see of him fighting off like still in bed, and he's able to overpower the assassin, and after sort of killing the assassin, he goes back to bed, like back to sleep.
Yeah, Longshanks was a good guy. He was a tough good guy. So yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, what happened was with Conrad, he was stabbed by two members of the Hashishin order in Tyre, in the street. And the thing there is, I will give them that the Hashishin order, they were very troublesome. They would kill Turkic Islamic rulers. They would kill, in this case, Christian rulers. Now on to Bede's thing. Now this is the thing. a couple Arab historians have actually, I've seen quotes from this, like of Arab historians, particularly around the Crusades, commentating on the that sort of thing, and they say that the Hashassin order would never, their assassinations would be decided solely by them. They couldn't be hired in like a hit or anything. So they don't tend to agree with Richard. However, um, it is possible that even though Richard didn't, they might have been trying to, might have preferred Richard or Saladin not in running Palestine and actually go back to a Crusader state.
I tell
in
you
some
what,
ways.
William, on that one, and on what modern Muslim historians say, etc., I'm just going to go with what Bede says because he knows so much more about that than I do. I'd be interested to see Bede's opinion on that, I must say.
So the only reason I was interested about that is if you look at the history of the Hashassin order, though, Duke, their hits are solely determined by their own like structure within their own certain sect. They're not actually like hired hitmans or anything like that. They target both other Muslims that they
I presume they would have to earn money some way or another. But like I said, I'm quite happy to listen to Bede's explanation of the Hashasins.
Well, I do have a whole stream on my channel, though it is paywalled, on all about the Hashashin. So if you want to become a channel member and watch that, you're welcome to.
There we go.
Yeah. So regarding their targets, yes, they did target Christians. In fact, I mentioned Raymond III of Tripoli earlier. Well, his father, Raymond II, was actually murdered by the assassins. So there you are. And of course, you've got comrades, as we've been talking about. Yes, regarding their motivations, something that really has to be stressed, and to make another like contemporary media comparison other than Kingdom of Heaven, obviously another product of modernity people may be familiar of the Crusades is the original Assassin's Creed game that came out in 2007.
That's how I was introduced.
Yeah. What I find really frustrating is that the assassins in that are so divorced from what they were in reality. It's annoying because again they're just kind of presented as Mexican like based freedom fighters against the evil like Illuminati Templars or whatever, and the reality,
and they're not even religious. They're just basically like atheists. There's no sorry, carry on, Bede.
Well, this is the thing. The assassins, they were religious radicals. It should be noted they were Shia, and specifically they were Nizaris, mainly Shia. So they were a fringe sect of Shia Islam who supported a different claimant to the Shia Caliphate, or the Imamate as they like to call it. And their main branch was in Persia and had a string of forts in the country. They also had like an offshoot in the Levant around this time, which was prominent under their leader known as the Old Man of the Mountain. So they were wreaking havoc, murdering both Sunni and Christian rulers. They even tried to assassinate Saladin a couple of times, but they did fail.
Yeah. Now, Bede, I did actually read a bit about them, and also I think it was from your stream as well. But I did read a bit about the Hashassin order. Apparently, like individual members, and this to Duke's point, like how did they finance themselves? A Hashassin member would say they'll be told, okay, you need to go to Damascus or something. They would just find a job, and they'll basically like sleeper agents almost. Find a job, become a palace guard or whatever, or be a merchant, and then they would get like the call or whatever, and then they'll spring into action.
More or less, because something you have to understand, everything they did was for religious motivation. I mean, the actual term they used for the assassins. I mean, again, our word assassin etymologically comes from the term hashashin or hashashia. That's where it comes from, and allegedly it was originally believed that as part of like their religious ceremonies, they would induce hashish to induce a kind of religious vision, though that later turned out to be bunk and not true. The actual names they called themselves, they used the term fidai, which is essentially it's Arabic. It's got a couple of different meanings. It can mean emissary, or it could mean like missionary, and essentially they viewed themselves as religious martyrs. And so when they went to, get a hit, so to speak, unlike most hitmen or assassins, you try and get away after you've done your kill. They wouldn't. They would just fight to the death, the guards, and then be martyred. So when you're looking at the assassins,
they'd get the 13 virgins and all that stuff. Yeah,
pretty much. You have to understand they're basically a medieval Hezbollah. That's essentially what the assassins were.
I've got this is just from various descriptions of, and the thing though is, the reason why the Hashassin were largely feared is usually they would try and not be seen. Though sometimes if they did an execution publicly, it's usually because they wanted it to be public, like with Conrad, for example.
Many of their targets were in public. I mean, obviously you've got Conrad's in Iran. I mean, their very first major hit was against the Nizam al-Mulk, who was the Grand Vizier of the Seljuk Empire. I mean, there's a very famous etching or picture you can find, which actually uses the thumbnail for my Assassin's Dream of them murdering Nizam al-Mulk. Obviously, they later killed one of the Abbasid caliphs as well. So yeah, they were very let's just say that they like to make a display of things.
Well, I mean, look, if a guy is willing to die to kill you, that is very difficult to defend against. I mean, even in the 21st century, that is very difficult to defend against, as Western forces have found in the Middle East repeatedly. If the guys trying to kill you don't care if you kill them, that's much harder than if they want to escape.
Yeah,
exactly.
Now, I mean, just take the incident with Longshanks. Now, bearing in mind, a member of the Hashasins was able to presumably sneak past or manage to get through somehow various lines of defenses and the fortification, everything, to get into the room with Eddie.
Yeah, he would have had bodyguards for sure, but they would probably have been outside his room.
Yeah, they weren't giving, but he managed to. And someone just put in here, like, chat, they worked as house servants. That was quite Richard put in there. That was quite common. Now this etching here, this one is from a description of sorry, a Hashashin member, and there's various like etching. I mean, unfortunately, most of it you type in the Hashashin, it'll come with like Assassin's Creed and all that sort of crap. But
yeah, I had that problem finding pictures for this stream, William.
Yeah.
Every time I put in like Richard I soldiers or Richard I warriors, all you get is AI slot basically. So yeah.
But this sort of clothing, with the dagger and everything, this is I mean, probably I think this description here was one of their like operations in Egypt, actually. This one here,
it's quite funny, William. They're a bit like the legend, not the truth, but the legend about the Japanese ninja. Like the Japanese ninja, the real ones were more kind of intelligence agents and stuff like that.
Or Ronin.
Or spy. No, not really. Yeah. Ronin were just samurai who didn't have a master. But the ninjas in reality were more like spies, intelligent agents, this kind of thing. But in modern cinema, etc., they've got this like assassin thing going on, which isn't really all that historical, to be honest. But it's very much like these guys from the Middle East, the Hashassin, very much like that.
There is an Iranian film, Iranian TV show about the Hashassin order, which I don't know if Bede's seen it. It's,
I didn't actually know that. I might give that a watch actually, as long as it's got subtitles. Because obviously I don't speak Farsi.
Yeah, yeah. I'm certain there are English subs out there for it. I've seen that. The thing though is, one thing they do, I mean, it's quite like the way that they behave and operate. It's not like Assassin's Creed stuff, so it's quite accurate. But what it is, it's like very much, oh, we're defending the Islamic world against like the Christians, and it's like, reality-wise, it's like no, the Hashassin were, they were causing havoc across the Islamic world in Iraq and Syria and Egypt, as well as like the Christians, and they were, they caused all sorts of trouble. With
all sorts of different religious sects and political groupings. I mean, like everywhere, basically.
Yeah, and now with the assassination of Conrad, one thing I did find during my research is in Tyre, because it was like in a quite public, the actual assailants were able to see. This is where a lot of the myth comes from. They seemingly appeared out of nowhere. It was actually like one of those sort of odd moments where, and this is something that they were famous for. There's also one account of I don't know if Bede knows the particular one, but there was one like sultan or some sort of emir who was so paranoid about being assassinated by the Hashassin, he ordered the guards, like several guards, to stand around his bed to watch over him. And then the following day, when they woke up, he was dead, and none of the guards knew how that was happening. He was assassinated by a Hashassin.
Piss shit guards, of course. They must have fallen asleep.
I would say, I would say one of the guards was a Hashassin who was activated. If I was to guess, if I was to guess,
more than likely,
yeah, entirely possible.
So you saying that, William, has just reminded me.
But even if one of the guards was a Hashassin, why didn't the other three know this? That's a bit strange. So,
but they were the thing that was they were masters of, and this is where the Assassin's Creed game goes. It annoys me. They're not just masters of because they're masters of disguise. They don't like dress like in like this or anything. They don't look like assassins. They don't run around. Some of them actually look like they're able to have like this. What was the phrase I saw in described about them, like adaptive personalities? Like they would appear like, they would pretend to be like some wealthy merchant or some street beggar, or they'd even pretend to be Christians.
William, sure.
They'd pretend to be Christian pilgrims. They'd pretend to be Christians.
Of course. But the point I'm making is, if this guy was surrounded by 4 guards, unless they were all Hashassin, the other 3 either fell asleep or they weren't very good guards,
I will say that you did sometimes get them working in groups to take down a target. Like with Nizam al-Mulk, it was at least 2 of them, I believe, who went for him.
Yeah, with Conrad, it was 2. With Conrad, it was quite brutal because both of them struck. One of them aimed for his back. The other one stabbed him. They both stabbed him in the back and the front at the same time. They wanted to make sure they, again, in public. Managed to slip through his guards as well to do it.
It's an interesting subject. I think people should go and check out Bede Britannia's stream on that, which I will do if I can. It's behind a paywall, so I might. We'll see. But yeah, I do.
It's not just
Well-
it's not just Muslims. Sorry, carry on.
Well, just to address what Richard Hughes is saying, remember the assassins were Shia, and in Shia Islam, one of the core tenets is the concept of taqiyya, which means to dissemble or precaution. So essentially, it is acceptable to, shall I say, be economical with the truth in order to preserve yourself or the interests of Shia Islam. And you can imagine how many ways that could be interpreted or exploited.
Yeah, and the
must
majority of
must
Sunni
work
Muslims.
must work well on juries in modern England. But yeah,
But the majority of Sunni Muslims, though, they, I mean, they did garner this mythological status in the Middle East among the population. They were largely feared. They were sort of seen as like a boogeyman for a lot of the common types and everything, because of there's like a level of myth about them. But ultimately, the majority population viewed them as not even real Muslims, as like kuffars, because of their their sect. They and of course, I think it was the Mongols that wiped them out in the end.
Yeah, it was the Mongols who finally conquered Alamet and finished them off. So
Yeah.
my God, I can say something good about the Mongols. Okay. Guys, I presume your next stream is going to be about the Fourth Crusade, which, in terms of fuck-ups, is probably one of the biggest fuck-ups in history. But I presume that's going to be your next stream, is it, William?
Yeah, it would be the Fourth Crusade, and then I was going to do, following the Fourth Crusade, the Northern Crusade, the first, the first, the Prussian Crusade,
the Teutonic Knights. The Teutonic Knights, yes.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, outside Acre, there was Richard allowed a newly knightly order where the Teutonics established themselves outside there. The trouble is, the Teutonic Knights, they were quite crowded out because you had these big knightly orders like the Templars and the Hospitallers and various others already present in the Holy Land, and so they weren't significant. And after the Teutonic Knights, they would have a presence in the Carpathians, in the border region between the Kingdom of Hungary and Wallachia, against the Vlachs and the sort of steppe people, the Pechenegs there. And then, of course, they would be invited, because their patron would be the German emperors and the nobility. Because they were part of the rule of the Teutonic Order was to become a knight, an actual knight brother. You had to be German and also be of noble birth. Non-Germans could join the order, but they couldn't get to the rank of I think it was knight brother or knightly brother. But they could become like a armored sergeant or something like that.
Yeah, and they're like their famous campaigns that Richard Hughes is talking about in the chat were against the barbarians or heathens or
it was the old Prussians who practiced some form of Baltic religion. They was like similar to that of Lithuania. They were similar to the Lithuanians.
They were pre-Christians.
Pre-Christian, yeah.
Yeah, and those guys were attacking those people in the Baltics, as you say, William. I'm never quite sure who I support in those wars, to be honest, because I'm not sure the heathens were doing all that much harm. But anyway, whatever.
Well, they were invited because the Duke of Mazovia was being raided by the Prussian. Or the thing is, when I say Prussians, there were several tribes. So not all of them were doing it. It was maybe like the tribe that bordered onto them, but they would be raiding into the territory. and the Duke of Mazovia, who I think was related to the Piast, the actual Polish royal family, and they were invited in to lead effectively a crusade and establish forts in Prussia, Western Prussia. But the funny, ironic thing is that because the Poles effectively invited them in, a few centuries later, they would be causing quite a few problems for the Poles. And then as many centuries later, it would be many problems for the Poles.
And it's also worth pointing out that many of the Prussian nobility, like the Junkers, they trace their ancestry back to some of these Teutonic knights and what have you. So
yeah, they would because afterwards you would have waves of German immigration and German settlement into the Teutonic state as it would become, and you would have the Polish. The funny thing is about the old Prussians, it took them really like nearly 150 years, 200 years to really integrate, because they were very stubborn when it came to conversion. I mean, some did, but then a lot of them didn't. You had series of rebellions and uprisings, one of which I think it was in the 1300s, where they nearly forced the Teutonic Knights out completely. It was very near
I tell you what, William, I'm going to be interested in your next stream if it's on the Fourth Crusade, because my reading of this, and you guys may or may not agree with me, is the Fourth Crusade is what fatally weakens the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, as modern people call it. And that's the end of the Roman state, because the Eastern Roman Empire was it was the Romans. They called themselves the Romans. And although they were Greek speaking, they were the last remnant of the Roman Empire. And it was really, although Byzantium and Constantinople survived after the Fourth Crusade, they were fatally weakened by it, basically. So I'm going to be very interested on your take on this, William, and also on Bede's take on it, because I think it was disastrous, and it certainly didn't do the Holy Land any good either, really. So,
no, I've said before, Duke, the Fourth Crusade was the biggest own goal in the history of Christendom.
Yeah, that's my view of it. So I'll be interested to see what you and William come up with on that one, Bede. Yeah, I totally agree with you, mate.
I mean, it one thing that it did do was it helped expand Bulgaria's domination in the region. It helped expand the Seljuk domination. It weakened everybody. I mean, all the enemies of the Byzantines and were heavily
all the enemies of the Christians, even, William. I mean, like I said, it did no good whatsoever for the Holy Land because it never got there.
No, and when the Greeks were able to wrestle back control of like the Kingdom of Thessalonica and the Latin Empire directly, there was still large parts of of their territory, like Crete and the Duchy of the Archipelago and other areas, which remained out of there, and Cyprus, which they never regained, and Rhodes as well. Famously Rhodes, and it allowed the Ottomans a very, very rapid success. And we will get to, by the way, when it comes to Crusades, we're going to get to the point where we're even going to come up to the Ottomans and Crusades against the Ottomans.
Cool. I'll be interested when the one I might join you for, if you do it, William, will be when you get to the Battle of Lepanto and stuff like that. That because I do know a bit about that because it's naval history. But
Yeah.
but this is the only crusade I know enough about to be worth contributing. Other than that, I'm a watcher and a listener, not a contributor.
I mean, I'm tempted because I was saying to Bede last time. I think because I mean, where do I draw the like demarcation of crusade? I said like I might do up to like the Battle of Necropolis, and Bede said, well, up to the Battle of Vara. I'm actually half tempted. You know what? We'll go up to the battle for Vienna, the siege of the 17th century
I
battle of
think
Vienna.
that's reasonable. Yeah, I think that's reasonable because that was kind of the last gasp of Ottoman expansion, I guess.
And also the coalition, like the Catholic Christendom coalition, in response to that, it even though technically it's not a crusade, it does like it kind of mimics the crusade.
It's called the Holy League.
Yeah.
So I mean, AM even himself called it the Last Crusade.
I think I do agree with AM on that, but I've seen that stream as well. For me, I would say that is like truly the last crusade, and also it did halt Ottoman expansion. You know, that was the well into Europe, that is, for any further into Europe, you know, via that route. And
I take it you're going to cover the Reconquista in the peninsula in Spain.
Oh, the Spanish one.
Yeah.
I could do maybe some separate streams from that, like spin-off, because that's the thing. I'm gonna technically, when I do the Northern Crusades, that's going to be Northern Crusades are almost like a spin-off one, right? They're spin-off ones. So I might do one where I might do a couple streams on the Reconquista. I don't know if I could do a Reconquista in one go. Maybe I could. I don't know, but I don't know if I could do it in one go.
You'd need a couple of episodes, I think, William, to do that at least.
But yeah,
because
I would do
you'd also have to talk about Portugal, and as you said, there was a certain amount of English and Norman help given to the Portuguese, for example.
Yeah, I mean, 14. The fall of Granada, that would be like that's like a 3-hour stream in one go, because I do know quite a bit about the 1492 and the and the build up to that will be quite a heavy one. So yeah, but yeah, I will get around to the Reconquista. That would definitely be a good one. And I'm just trying to think what.
Someone in the chat is asking if there are any good movies about the Crusader era. All I would say is there's lots of movies, but not many good movies. So yeah.
The only one that I can think of is called Arn, the Templar Knight. That is it. It doesn't depict the Templar, the actual Christians, as like villains, and he's like this what is it? He is this Scandinavian boy, and it was a series. I remember I saw it years and years ago, and he fell sick. He was taken. His parents took him to the local monastery, and he was healed. But part of the bargain was that if he was, they required God's help, that he'd have to serve God, so he had to stay with the monastery. And his friend would then become like I think king of Sweden or something like that. He would become he was prince, but he'd become king of Sweden, or something along those lines. And Arn would then train as a monk, and one of his teachers was is a member of the Knights Hospitaller, and who was I think French or German or something like that. And he then trains him in sword fighting, and then when he reaches age, he's able he he ends up sleeping with as a monk, he ends up sleeping with a woman and gets her pregnant, and then she's locked up in a monastery. and then as sort of penitence, he's then.
Are you sure
pressed
she's locked up in a monastery rather than a nunnery?
Oh, sorry, nunnery. I meant to say nunnery. Yeah.
Sorry, mate. Sorry.
She's locked. Well, she was locked up in the monastery when she got pregnant. Sorry. Yeah. She's locked up in a nunnery, and he then becomes a Templar knight. He then goes through the trials and is accepted. Whether or the thing though is, and this is something that there's been I saw one ridiculous historian, like TikTok, Twitter historian, said that the Templars were they needed like all these member of prostitutes for their knights and this, that, and the other. And it's like, well, first of all, no, the actual Templar knights, not members like the merchants and people, but the actual knightly brothers, they were sworn to chastity. They were sworn to basically the strictest form of the Benedictine code. They would not break, because they were the most fanatical forms. They could not, but they would not break any of that. They were effectively more more extreme than most.
They were
monks.
Probably chaste, is what you're trying to say here.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, they were chaste. They were. They wouldn't eat red meat. That's one thing. Their diet was very limited. Their attendance to worship, even the way that they would sleep, pray, all that sort of stuff was determined on the Benedictine code. So they were very different. Even drinking to excess, they wouldn't drink. I don't know if they could drink alcohol, but I think it was only like limited to wine, possibly. I don't think they would drink ale or anything like that. There was even a limitation to that, which would mean, I don't know in real life if a figure like Arn would be allowed into the order, but there you go. But anyway, it's a good series. Do check it out.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. But I'll look forward to your next episode of this stream series. It sounds good. Guys, can I just say, if you're interested in history, hopefully there's going to be a splendid isolation history stream tomorrow. Really depends on Mitch, which I think is going to be about the Napoleonic Wars. But as I say, it depends on Mitch. If he's still available, we'll be doing that tomorrow. And of course, if you're interested in current events and our takes on them, and everyone on this stream is fairly regular on Splendid Isolation. I wish Bede was a bit more regular, to be honest. We'll be talking about current events on Saturday evening, British time, on Splendid Isolation 273. My God, we've been going a long time. But yeah.
That's cool. So, Bede, is there anything you want to promote and plug before we head off?
Yes, this Saturday in the afternoon, about 3:00. Myself and my good friend Hunger will be carrying on with our Modern Iran series. It's going to be a interesting one. We're going to be discussing the oil nationalization crisis, featuring a certain Mohammad Mossadegh, and the infamous 1953 coup involving MI6 and CIA. So if you're interested in hearing my take on that, go and give that a watch.
That's a pretty good series. I watched that. I know nothing about it, but I know much more than I used to, just thanks to watching Bede's series. So
yeah. No, that's quite interesting. And I was going to say, would that be the episode where you cover where you be covering like the sort of, I know that'll be a bit later, the Shah's the probably the following episode, the White Revolution.
Yeah, the White Revolution will be the stream or two after this one on Saturday. So
yeah, where it's kind of bizarre because he ends up turning on all the local power nodes of Iran. You know, the Azeris, the merchants, the you know, the religious leadership in society. It's kind of weird that he attacks like all different branches that make up Iran. Like you know, I get you want change, but you can't alienate like you can't
Yeah.
alienate society completely. Everyone's society.
No, if you do that, you tend to get overthrown, as he was. So
Yeah, I mean, I've discovered that playing like countless Universalis and Paradox games has taught me that. You know, there's like that little meter where you have
To be fair, William, the British government seems to be able to alienate all of the real British bits of society, and it still continues in power. But you know, I mean, the real British bits as opposed to the paper bits.
well, you see, the British government is the strongest state for we are trying to cause its collapse on the outside and they from the inside, but still, it does not collapse.
No, it's kind of a, you know.
Not yet. I think we're going to get there, but not yet.
Well, on current trajectory, yeah. I mean, God knows. So yeah, and oh, I meant to say, Duke, before we head off, I do want to book in at some point for a stream. I want to do one because we've done one on topics and places and times, but another one individual. I want to do one on John A. Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada.
Sure. Quite happy to do that. The other one I think we should do at some stage is the Australian Prime Minister during World War One.
Yeah, that'd be quite a good one. Like
who was that? Billy Hughes.
Billy Hughes, thank you, Bede. Labour Prime Minister, but a big-time Empire loyalist and a very sensible man. But yeah, I'm quite happy to do McDonald, the Canadian guy. Yeah, you tell me when you want to do it, William, and we'll do it for sure.
Oh no, cool. Right, everyone. So thanks for everyone joining, and thanks to my guests, and I'll see you all next time.